Now it's time to select a stitch, and right now I want to select a straight stitch. In this case, it's already selected on my machine, but if it's not on yours, all you need to do is turn your stitch selector dial so that the illustration matches with the little bump above your stitch selector dial, and you can hear it and feel it click into place. I'm on the straight stitch, but I see a gray stitch, a blue stitch, and a red stitch. So how do I know which one I'm going to sew? Up on my stitch length dial, I have a gray area, a blue S1, and a red S2. If my little bump above the stitch length dial is lined up with the gray area, I'm going to sew a gray stitch. If I turn it so that I have the blue S1 stitch selected, I will sew a blue stitch. And if I turn it again to the red S2, I will sew the red stitch. But I want to sew this gray stitch, so I'm going to move my stitch length dial to the gray zone, and I'm going to set it for about 2.5, which is standard for most fabrics and straight stitch sewing. This machine also has a stitch width dial, and for straight stitch sewing, I want it set to 0. Now we're ready to test and make sure we threaded our machine properly. When testing to make sure that you have threaded your machine properly, I recommend always sewing on a scrap piece of fabric and not your project first. So I have some scrap material here. I'm going to put it under my presser foot and lower it, and I'm going to begin sewing by pressing on the foot control. I'm going to turn the hand wheel towards me so the needle is in the highest position, lift the presser foot lifter, and trim the thread. Stitch looks good on the top and the bottom. So we are ready to sew. Our machine is threaded properly. If your stitches look like this on the top and loopy on the bottom, it means that your machine isn't threaded properly. I recommend rethreading your machine, and you can look in your quick start guide and instruction manual for more information. Now it's the moment we've all been waiting for. It's time to sew a seam on your project. On your needle plate, you have some markings such as 3/8, 5/8, and 1 inch. A lot of commercial patterns use a 5/8 seam allowance, so I am going to put my fabric under my presser foot so it lines up with the 5/8 line. I'm going to lower my presser foot and stitch a few stitches forward by pressing down on my foot control. Now I'm going to raise the needle to the highest position by turning the hand wheel towards me. I'm going to press and hold the reverse lever and sew backwards a few stitches. Now I'm going to release the reverse lever, and I'm going to sew along my seam. Notice that I'm not pushing or pulling the fabric. The feed dogs are doing all of the work for me. I'm just guiding it along the guideline. Sew to the end of your fabric, raise the needle in the highest position, press and hold the reverse lever, and sew backwards a few stitches. Now release the reverse lever and sew back to the end. Turn the hand wheel towards you so the needle's in the highest position, raise your presser foot lifter, and trim the threads. Now we have a finished seam. I sewed backwards at the beginning and the end to secure the stitches. That way our project doesn't unravel. This machine comes with a Sew Easy foot, which might make it especially easy for beginners to stay in line with your seam. It has markings on the side to show you seam allowances such as 3/8, 1/2 inch, and 5/8. The 5/8 line is the third red mark over, so that's where I'm going to move my guide. Now we need to change the presser foot. Hold your foot and push it towards you, and it will just pop off. Take your Sew Easy foot and push it away from you, and it's attached. Put your thread under the presser foot. Now I'm going to sew a seam using the Sew Easy foot. Place your fabric under the foot so that the edge of the seam lines up with the guide. Lower the presser foot and press on the foot control to sew forward a few stitches. Turn the hand wheel towards you so the needle's in the highest position. Press and hold your reverse lever and sew backwards a few stitches. Release the reverse lever, turn the hand wheel towards you so the needle's in the highest position, and begin sewing your seam. All I need to do is line up the fabric with this guide as I sew, and it makes it super easy to see my seam. Sew to the end. Turn the hand wheel towards you so the needle's in the highest position, and press and hold your reverse lever for a few stitches. Release your reverse lever, and sew forwards to the end. Now turn the hand wheel towards you again so the needle's in the highest position, raise your presser foot, and trim the threads. Now we've sewn a seam with the Sew Easy foot. Now I want to sew some decorative stitches. I'm going to turn my stitch selector dial to this illustration where we see a multi-stitch zigzag, a honeycomb stitch, and a feather stitch. First, I'm going to sew the multi-step zigzag stitch. So I'm going to come up to the stitch length dial, and it's already in the gray zone. I'm going to move it to 3, just to see how that looks. Then I'm going to come up to my stitch width dial, and I can move it anywhere from 1 to 6, 1 being narrow, 6 being very wide. I want to make a wide stitch, so I'm going to leave it at 6. I highly recommend sewing on a scrap piece of material with the same fabric as your project. This will allow you to fine-tune the look of your stitch exactly how you want. Now I'm going to take my fabric, place it under the presser foot, lower the presser foot, and press on the foot control to start sewing. Turn the hand wheel towards you so the needle's in the highest position. Raise your presser foot lifter and trim the thread. And there is our beautiful multi-step zigzag. Now I want to sew the blue honeycomb stitch. I'm going to come up to the stitch length dial and move it so I have the blue S1 selected, blue and blue. I'm going to keep my stitch width dial at 6 because I want this stitch to be as wide as possible, but you can always customize it for what you want. Now I'm going to put my fabric under the presser foot, lower it, and press on the foot control to begin sewing. Turn the hand wheel towards you so the needle's in the highest position. Raise your presser foot lifter and trim the thread. And here we have a fabulous honeycomb stitch. Last, I want to make this red feather stitch. The stitch is already selected on the stitch selector dial. I just need to come up to my stitch length dial and turn it so that I have the red S2 selected, red and red. And my stitch width dial is still set to 6, and I'm going to leave it there. I'm going to place my fabric under the presser foot and lower it, and begin sewing again. Turn the hand wheel towards you so the needle is in the highest position. Raise the presser foot, trim the threads, and here we have a spectacular feather stitch. Now let's talk about some zigzags. The zigzag stitch on your machine is a highly versatile stitch and can be used for utility and decorative sewing. I played around with the stitch length and stitch width dials on the machine to give an example of how you can really customize the look. On the left 3, I left the stitch length at about a medium, but I made a narrow zigzag, one at about a medium width, and a wide one. And on the 3 to the right, I left the width at about a medium, but I changed the length. So a long zigzag, a medium zigzag, and a short zigzag. Play around with your dials, have some fun, let's sew a buttonhole.